Hello, we're at the Seattle Antiquarian Book Fair. It's 10th of October 2010, and I'm Taylor Bowie, and I'm sitting here speaking with a very old friend of mine who I've known at least 25 years, bookseller from Santa Monica, Eric Kline. Eric?
How are you, Taylor?
I'm well, thank you. I hope you're the same, and thank you for sitting down here to talk to us for the ABAA Oral Visual History Project.
It's my great pleasure to be able to take the time away from my booth to be here with you today on October the 10th, 2010. Do something memorable today.
We'll get you back your booth as soon as possible. I'd like to just kind of start you off, ask you a few questions, and we'll sort of just take it from there and see where things go. First of all, tell us where you were born, when, if you like, and a little bit about your early life, your education, things like that.
So I was born on May 20th, 1951 at Cedars of Lebanon Hospital in Los Angeles, California, and into a house of two loving parents. I was the youngest of three. My parents got married in 1940. My father was in the Air Force at that time when they got married. My mom is still alive. She's 92, living in the house they bought in 1940 up in Benedict Canyon in West Los Angeles.
That is great.
Which is pretty cool. It's pretty cool. She loves that. I went to school in LA and to public school, to Warner Elementary and Emerson Junior High School, which is behind the Mormon Temple on Santa Monica Boulevard.
I know that well.
Yeah.
Hard to miss.
Hard to miss that monument. And then to University High School, which was in West Los Angeles, between basically Westwood and Santa Monica, California. And went to it was a really great high school in those days. There were an example of it would be there were AP courses in all sorts of subjects. They had Russian, German, Latin, French, Spanish, English. If you were bright, which wasn't me in this case, you could actually take courses at UCLA in your senior year. And I had a number of friends who were in that sort of class. And from high school, I went to a small liberal arts college in the Midwest called Wilmington College, which at one time was known because the Bengals built the gym there, and they were trained during the summer. Otherwise, people wouldn't know much about it. It was 20 minutes from Yellow Springs, Ohio, where Antioch College was, and Wilmington was very much like Antioch. I like to say that it was basically half the price and easier to get into, and that's how I got into it.
That would have worked for me, too.
And it was a great work-study, social action-oriented school. The president, the year I came, had just come from the United Nations. It was during the Vietnam War, and I was lucky enough to have a 2S deferment at that time, for all of those out there who know what a 2S deferment is anyway. And we used to do things like silent vigils down by the courthouse and stuff like that in those days. It was a great place. I was able to, when I was 19, for example, I was able to go to the Navajo reservation and teach school, and then come back to college, and then go back to the reservation again, and then from there the school had a fantastic thing. It was part of a large consortium of schools in the Southern Ohio Valley where you could take classes at up to 60 different colleges. So I took courses at the University of Cincinnati, at Antioch, at Wright State. And then ultimately, in my sophomore year, I transferred actually to Hebrew Union College, which was part of this consortium. And
Where was that?
In Cincinnati, Ohio. And I transferred into the dorm, to the college, and studied there full time and lived in the dorms. And then my senior year, I went to two schools simultaneously. Hadn't fulfilled all my requirements at my undergraduate school, so I went quarters to Wilmington and semesters to HUC in that senior year before I graduated in 74, and then I went from 74, I went to Israel after the Yom Kippur War, and lived in Israel for 2.5 years. I traveled around the country when I first came there and entertained for the troops with a group of traveling hippie musicians.
Now, what did you do in the traveling band?
Sang and played the tambourine and threw my energy into the whole trip.
Did you have training in the tambourine playing?
The girls were really good for teaching me how to play the tambourine.
I bet they could really shake it. Well, that's nice. Then, after the 2.5 years in Israel, I take it you came back to the United States?
Came back to the States, and I went to Brandeis University, where I did my graduate work in Jewish history and philosophy. And I was there for 6 years, until 1980, 81, I guess. Then I moved to Europe at that time. I fell in love with a German woman. Hence, you guys might understand why I've got this Jewish interest and this German interest and stuff like that. But I fell in love with this German woman, moved to Germany. I shipped 2 tons of books that I had acquired while I was a graduate student. I had many more books than that, of course, but over to Germany and landed them in Hamburg, rented a little cellar in Hamburg. We bought a VW bus, and I began driving around Europe, wholesaling European books to European dealers.
Well, we're a little ahead of things now. I want to back up to ask, how did you first involve yourself with old books, antiquarian books? How did that start? I mean, all of a sudden we've got 2 tons of books, and I don't know how they got there.
When I was, I grew up in a bookish house.
Right. Your dad was an attorney.
My dad was an attorney,
right.
And he actually grew up in a German-speaking house himself, although he never spoke German after the war. Our family was liquidated by the Nazis. My father's side of the family was liquidated by the Nazis, the entire family, and by Einsatzgruppen on 2 successive days in 1941. But there was always, the living room was full of books. My father read all the time. He was quite an intelligent gentleman. And after I graduated college, I went to Israel, and I was studying in Jerusalem. I began to acquire Hebrew books. Mm-hmm. And
were these secondhand older books, or just kind of across the board?
I was actually buying like the sets of books that one would need for their study, whether the Bible, the Talmud, these various types of religious books, and they come. You walk into any sort of traditional Jewish house, you'll find that there'll be bookshelves full of these books that theoretically have Jewish law on them, and all this.
So I imagine that by default, some of these were older books, although that perhaps wasn't your intention.
I would say actually in Jerusalem, there's a huge book trade, mm-hmm. and I primarily bought new editions. There was a thing called Shavua HaSefer, the week of the book every year, mm-hmm. where the main publishers would discount their books up to 50% off, and they would fill the squares all over the country. And you come out and there'd be all these published books, all like at half price on tables in the city squares.
Yeah.
And so it was a great time to buy, your 7-volume set of the Mishnah, or your 10-volume commentary of the Maharal of Prague, or something like this. I did buy occasionally secondhand books. I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, I didn't really buy truly antique books.
Mm-hmm.
I did in graduate school have some fantastic life experiences, like all of us have had, with older and rare books. And my very first experience with a rare book was when I was 19 in the Houghton Library. A friend of mine was at Harvard. I hitchhiked down from Ohio, and I had a book in my hand that was purported to tell the true story of the Jewish messianic figure Shabbatai Tzvi, sometimes pronounced Sabtai Zevi, but it's really Shabbatai Tzvi, who was in 1660 trying to rally the people to convince the caliph in Constantinople to let the Jews back into Palestine. So anyway, this book was written in 1665, an English account of a guy who says he's the eyewitness to these events. And it's like I'm holding this book and I'm 19 reading this book saying, oh my God, this really happened. Oh, wow, this is fantastic,
Would you consider that moment, looking at that book, maybe what perhaps planted the idea somewhere in your mind for, working with antiquarian books? Certainly must have played a part. Obviously, it made a tremendous impression on you.
It made an impression on me. I think that that's a good question, too. I don't know that I have the answer to that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say no by default.
Okay, that's safe. That's good.
But it was definitely a great first experience, and a later experience in graduate school time that was like this mind-boggling. I was doing research in London on my doctoral work, and I went to the Hall of Records. It's called something else. I can't remember what they call it right now. The PRO, Public Record Office. Mm-hmm. And I came in with my letter of credential and everything, and they said, do you want the round room or the rectangular room? So I said, is one any better than the other? They said, no, they're about the same thing. So I said, let's go with the round room.
I would have too. I would have picked the round room.
Why not? It sounds like a good thing. So I had two experiences. I had many experiences that day, but the two that just blew me away was I walk in the door and places reference books all the way around, desk in the center, and I come in. There's a ladder, and this guy's got this long parchment thing hanging over the ladder, and they're like making notes and looking at what the hell is this, And then I'm seated, and they said, of course, you can't take any of the reference books off the shelf. You have to just leave them and use them there, and then go back to your desk. So I'd been working at Harvard. I was at Brandeis, but I'd been working at Harvard for months on a very short period of time, 10 years in later Stewart period in 1660, 1670. And there was one physical volume in this whole listings of the PRO's holdings that covered that period. So, and I had it checked out from Harvard, I would say, for like a year and a half, and it never was recalled. And I'm at Harvard, right? So I see that they have the books on the shelf. So I, of course, bring that volume to take to my desk, being typically disrespectful of rules, and have it at my desk. So I get up and I'm walking around, and I walk over to the man who's looking at this thing. I said, by the way, what's that? What are you looking at on this ladder?
Yeah.
He says, oh, well, that's just the Doomsday book, you know. And I say to myself, that's the original Doomsday book you're looking at.
Draped on the ladder.
Draped on the, and that's how they read it, actually, because it's this long, long parchment thing. They actually just drape it on a ladder, and I say, oh, wow, I think I must really be in a real place here. And then I'm back working all day. A guy comes along, nice natty-looking guy in his 20s. He says, oh, there it is. And I look at him like, what is this? Yeah, I've been looking for 20 minutes for that reference book, you know, I said, you've been looking for this? So, of course, I was, you know.
Now, what I understand here is that the book at Harvard, no one cared about for a year
and a half.
Here in London, in 20 minutes, 2 people want it.
Exactly.
That's nice. I like that.
And it was cool. He was working in the same period. There's nobody I had met in Boston working in the same period. We had at least having to chat when we walked out of the place later. That was fun. Those are like experiences that just made the romance of rare books and the whole thing come alive for me.
Well, tell us how you entered the trade. Let's get to that.
Yes,
I'm curious.
Not a problem. After graduate school, I went and lived in Europe. When I was in graduate school, I began basically. I didn't know that it was called scouting, actually, but I began learning how to buy books at library sales and things like that, take them to a bookseller, in this case mostly Pangloss in Harvard Square, because I liked academic books.
Herbert Hillman was the proprietor.
Very unusual guy, very nice guy.
Nice man.
And I would basically leverage him. So I'd buy the book for $1, $2, or $3. I'd take it to him. Either he'd give me $5 for it, the price of $45 or whatever, or he'd give me maybe $10 or $15 trade credit.
Right.
And most of the time I'd spotted books in his shop that I wanted, so I was much more happy just to trade and feel like I was leveraging into my things. And I built up quite a large collection.
At that point, was that your primary motivation in scouting, was to help build your own collection?
My own private library,
yes.
And I had this crazy thing that I liked to own everything that I'd read. So meanwhile, I was reading quite voraciously at that point in my life, which is not true anymore, but it was true then. And so I ended up building quite a large and good academic collection in later Stewart, and then of course in Jewish interests of mine as well. So that was a lot of it. And I would go down to the old Barnes and Nobles in New York and come back with some incredible remainders from Krauss and things like that had these list prices of $100 that they were selling for $3 on the wall. And he might give me 25 credit, he'd price them 45 or whatever. So I began to build my library that way. And then I, at the same time, was buying from the library sales, like the Brandeis Women's Committee or from the Harvard Gifts and Exchange. Right. And I filled a huge basement in Cambridge of this Victorian house I lived in with pallets full of books. Probably, when I then later shipped them, I had a 30-foot container, floor to ceiling, all boxes going to the West Coast. So I built a big collection of books. But again, it was content over form. I bought ex-library books and books for their contents. It wasn't like we're looking for these fine copies. Right. And I then shipped 2 pallets of those to Europe to live in Europe for a while. And I supported myself in Europe, traveling around with this VW bus, selling them to dealers to give me pocket money while I was doing more academic work. So eventually, I said, guess what? I'm not going to really finish my doctorate. And I came back to California.
To Los Angeles.
To Los Angeles, where I was born.
Right.
My hat in my hand, back into my parents' house, and that was in its own way. I felt good because I hadn't been there for a long time.
What year was that?
1982.
Okay.
2, 3. And I actually stayed there for 2 years, cooking at home at night and trying to be a good son who'd been wayward in the past and all that sort of stuff.
Were you buying and selling books in that period too?
In that period of time, I had gotten a job with an engineering company, and I was doing things like educational seminars. And at the same time, though, with my mom's assistance, I did put together my first and probably only really great catalog that I ever did. And that was a catalog of over 2,500 books in Jewish studies. That we, of course, like we all did in those days, did on the typewriter and all the rest, and cards. And we made a limited edition, perfect bound book.
Wow.
What I thought, one of the things that I was interested in was I did things that in those days, of course, today would all just be done electronically, but we looked up everything in Munsell. So I had Munsell references, thinking that librarians would be interested and they could cross-reference that way. I had bibliographic references. And then I also, with those days, I liked the idea of book review. So I used to add, I went through the whole book review indexes, and anything book that had a review, I put that reference in as well,
Wow.
so that my catalog theoretically could have some utility.
As a reference piece
As a reference piece
yeah.
itself.
Now, what year did that first catalog come out?
1985.
1985.
And I was actually, when you look at it today, of course, I'm ashamed of it in some levels. On the other hand, at the time, the librarians that got it were like, they said, this is fantastic, and they actually did. I was really privileged. They really put it into the reference library at UCLA and Harvard, and it's an LC, and they actually put it, they kept the catalog, which was pretty groovy when you think about it.
Did you then continue to say deal out of your parents' home?
So I was
mostly mail order.
I was doing a little bit of mail order out of the house, and then an old friend of mine from elementary school told me that she'd heard about another guy who was doing books.
And what was that person's name?
His name was David Morrison.
David Morrison.
That's right.
And he was known as a long-time, but now former member of the ABAA.
Right. And so David had a totally cool trip going. He had a space down on Central Avenue in downtown, which has now been gentrified quite a bit, on the second floor of a big long building with room after room after room, just jammed floor to ceiling with books. He had.
Bet it wasn't gentrified then.
Oh man, no, it wasn't gentrified then. It was not gentrified then. Just unbelievable, floor to ceiling worth of stuff. And one room was all records, one room was like equipment. He loved photography.
And was he actually in business at this point?
David had already had a shop on Melrose, and
I didn't know that.
He had a shop and had felt that he was taken advantage of somewhat by the trade, and closed the shop.
That sounds like something for another discussion. But that's a very interesting.
This is how I recollect it. In any case, I mean,
okay.
I'm not saying anything casting aspersions, but I can imagine myself too. That if you have a book that. Taylor Boy comes and says, I said, Taylor, I don't know what it's really worth. What do you want to pay me? And you say $10, and then you find that the Taylor price is at $100. I'm not saying that never happened. One might feel taken advantage of, for example. So, anyway, David had this thing, and then we started talking, and I said, well, gee, I've got lots of books. I just brought a whole container in from the East Coast. My library landed at downtown myself at a storage place. And
now, just let me clarify. You had also known him back in school days.
No,
you had
never
not.
known him.
It was just through this mutual.
My friend Carla Howard introduced us both
at
a dinner party, and then we said with all full of naivete, it seemed like it made sense. We both had a lot of books. We could capitalize the business with books, and neither of us had any real capital. And David always had a great nose for real estate.
Oh, okay. Well, I was also going to say you had a great nose for books, too.
Oh, fantastic.
Extraordinary.
He was a guy, I'm so different than he, and I mean, we're different in so many ways, but
yes.
If we went to the same library sale,
yeah.
David could, come in and just look at, we wouldn't even look at the table. He could just, somehow just reach out and start grabbing and putting him down, and I would have to, go there and, focus and say, oh, that's... I mean, I wasn't maybe as slow as I'm making myself out to be, but David was, just a master. It was unbelievable.
I have seen him do that. I've been both the victim and the observer of situations
fascinating.
like that.
It was fascinating, and it was in this sense. I mean, I'm ahead of myself real quickly here, but later I was told that in LA they called us the odd couple. In many ways we were. But one of the ways, an example would be, is David loved to get up first thing in the morning and buy from the Salvation Army, outbid all those other cats and buy the bins, or he would be up on a weekend at 5 or 6 going to every yard sale, and his favorite thing doing was to get something for $1 or less. And I was happy to go to, Sotheby's and look through the catalog or buy from the trade. I'd rather go through your stock,
yes.
book by book by book. Remember, it's before the internet, so my knowledge has some value for once. And I could go through and find the mistakes, and I could take the whole day, and I don't mind paying you your price, less whatever I could cudgel you into giving me as a discount. And as a result, we had a really cool mix of books in our shop. We had, in all honesty, because I traveled a lot, we both traveled a lot in those years, 85 to 90, I was in a lot of bookstores. We had a really good bookstore, and one of the reasons it was cool.
Now, we should also say that the store was this the one
Santa
on
Monica,
Arizona?
On Arizona.
Yes, the Morrison and Kline books.
Right.
So I have fond memories of that.
In LA, right into the period 80 to 85, the bookseller row had been on Westwood Boulevard. They had people like Ken Carmichael, George Houlet, Frank Spellman.
Roy Bleiweiss.
Roy Bleiweiss was there. One of the mystery dealers was there. There was a woman that did Egyptology. There was the old bookfinders.
Yeah. What was there?
Needham Bookfinders was
Needham,
there.
yeah.
Someone like Ken, if you hear him, Ken will have a photographic memory for all of this. I have just a befuddled memory.
It was all near Junior's Delicatessen.
All
which is nice.
on Westwood,
Very
and
nice.
then that area began to go down as rents got up, and also the book trade was sort of falling off a little bit. They still had Hollywood Boulevard. Anyway, David found this space down on Arizona Avenue near a sort of defunct pedestrian mall, 4 blocks from the beach, and the owner was a Hungarian emigre. Very unusual guy. And we looked at the space. It was $1 a foot, whatever. Mm-hmm. He was extremely handy, David, and he still is. But he was extremely handy. So, for example, he said to me, "We'll do the floors ourselves." I said, "That's fine. I'm going to build the bookshelves." I said, "That's great." He didn't like it that we did the floors together. Then I went on the road to go buy books, and he built all the bookshelves himself initially. He held that against me for a long time, but. It was, we had this small shop, and what made it really special, it's a 1,200 square foot shop, and it evolved like any other store. We started with poetry readings and music inside the shop, and then more and more books, and filling until it was, in the end, it was a real labyrinth. I mean, truly a labyrinth.
Yes, it was.
Of rows upon rows. We used to jam that place with books.
But I should say that it was worth exploring, as I could say that as a bookseller, and certainly any collector would have had a fine time.
Floor to ceiling books, double shelves throughout, because I went to an auction, I found like these 16-inch deep cabinets, so we could double shelve on them. And it was, what made it great was this mixture of David's style of buying with mine, and the following thing. As we all know, books are regional. Even with the internet, books are still regional, it's just that you now don't have to travel to go bring them from wherever to wherever.
Right.
So David, our deal was David went twice a year from LA to Vancouver Island and back for 3 weeks or more on the road in his van, and I would go from Montreal to DC and back, or I had one trip I could do in the Midwest from Chicago down to like Kansas City, or I could go to Europe. So I was away 3 times, he was away 2 times, and we just shipped books back to LA. So our place, and we weren't all that conscious about really properly pricing, so of course we sometimes were too high, but often we actually had reasonable prices.
Yes.
And it was a good contrast. If I priced too high and David priced too low, then if the dealer came in and made a nice stack, it averaged out anyway. As long as you're willing to average,
sure,
you could do it. If you only want to buy the right book, okay, so you buy less. And
so you guys were in business for 5
years.
Really?
And David really had a big influence on me. He taught me a lot of stuff, most of which I've of course forgotten. But I mean, an example of something he taught me in the old days was we bought a library that had the Grapes of Wrath, and there were 2 copies, right? There's a dust jacketed copy and a non-dust jacketed copy. Both of them are first editions, both in great shape. So David says, okay, we're going to price the dust jacketed copy $350 and the non-dust jacketed copy at $65. And I said, are you crazy? It's not a lithograph, it's just a dust jacket. I mean, what are you talking about? How can it be so much? And so he said, no, I'm right. You see. So we put it in our small little lock case for literature. And like 2 days later, Jim Pepper walks in.
I can guess which one Jim Pepper bought.
Jim bought that, dust jacket one less 20%, which he then marked 5 or 6 or whatever his price, which was fine with us. And the non-dust jacket one sat around for months and months and months, and eventually it did sell actually. And I said, it was a real lesson. I never really understood anything about modern firsts.
Yeah.
And David got me into popular culture. I do photography today. A lot of the influence on that comes from David. But it was a cool mix. I brought my religion and my academic stuff and archaeology and ancient religions and my broad interests in the arts. And David had this real knowledge and interest, a passion toward what I call popular culture, not just film and all that sort of stuff.
Design, everything.
Really a great eye.
What broke up the partnership?
What really broke up the partnership, I mean, there are probably 2 things. What broke up the partnership was if we had 2 desks and 2 telephones and 2 typewriters, I think that we probably could have stayed as partners.
Oh dear, just the quarters were too close. I see.
But we ultimately separated, and David took his stash and he went up to Portland and he bought the business, the building that he has his old business was in. He bought his house, established himself there. He owns multiple properties. He's had multiple bookstores, and I thought I would just go away. But I was influenced by my mother, who told me I couldn't just go away. I said, Mom, I'm going to go travel. I got money. I have no debts. I got money in my pocket. I got money in my safe deposit box. I got my books in storage. I'm going to just go to Israel and Europe, and I'll see you in a year or so.
No.
And she said, no, you can't do that. You've been building a business all this time. What do you mean you're just going to go away? I said, well, come back. I said, no one will remember you.
Yeah.
And she probably was right about that.
Mom knows best in that case.
Oh,
Absolutely.
maybe. So
what did you do then?
I took the books. A guy down the street, the Promenade, which is now one of the most traffic pedestrian streets in all of Los Angeles.
But back then it was still pretty iffy.
Had been renovated and was just coming online. And so a guy had a building that was supposed to be torn down. And he said to me, I've got 3,000 feet, and I'll rent it to you for $1,000 a month for like 6 months until the building goes down. So I said, the summer was coming. I said, that sounds fantastic.
It does.
I'll just roll my books around the corner.
Yeah.
I can spread them all out. I can have parties. I can do poetry readings. There's a whole new promenade thing that's happening.
That's a big space.
It was a big space. And lo and behold, they didn't sell the building. They didn't tear it down. So I ended up getting trapped because like 6 months out, I was having fun. And meanwhile, the stock was all tired. I hadn't been buying books. As people come in now, there's nothing new. They're not interested anymore in books, as we all know, right? So I had to start taking my money and going out and buying books.
That's right.
And making a new stock. So I had that shop in that space, and then later I had a 6,000 square foot shop in that same space. I moved, they subdivided my space, and I moved 2 doors up in the same building. I had 6,000 feet.
Now, do I recall that one or the other of those spaces was damaged during the big earthquake?
Actually, I got forced out of the big space on the promenade. The building was going to be sold. They wanted to move my rent at that time, $10,000 a month, going to $15,000 a month over 5 years with the renewal at market. So I said renewal at market.
Forget it.
And they wouldn't give me one penny. I said, in the end, I finally said, okay, I'll do it, but I want $50,000 from you, which you can amortize over the 5 years to give me build-out money. And they laughed at me and said, there is no build-out money on the 3rd Street Promenade. So I said, fuck you.
What are friends for?
Really.
Jesus, that's awful.
So I moved around the corner to 4th Street, actually, and
I remember that space.
And it was a very cool space. And I had another shock of business since I'm such a savvy business cat. I'm 1 block away from my old shop, literally, with the exact same address, and nobody came. Nobody came. I had 4,000 people on a mailing list,
and no one would come.
I sent out postcards, 4,000 postcards. We had invited them to parties. Nobody came. It was fascinating, actually. It really was fascinating.
We only have a few minutes, unfortunately. Frankly, I want to say for posterity that I would like this interview to be about 3 hours long. But I do want to get you to the point of where you are now, and you have a large space you work out in the valley. Is that correct?
I'm in the San Fernando Valley, in an all-Hispanic area now. I have 15,000 square feet. I had, after the earthquake that wiped me out in this other space in Santa Monica, I moved to a place down at LAX. I had 15,000 feet in an office tower, all windows. It was the most spectacular space you could ever imagine.
That would have been very distracting.
I loved it. It was the sunsets over the airport were just magnificent, and everyone loved it. It was all shelved out, 15,000 feet in all the cubbies. I'd taken over a failed business, and all the side rooms. Every room was shelved out with its own category and shit like that. And a full service building, air conditioned, a whole trip, and that cost me $2,500 a month, 15,000 feet. The whole building was like empty. It was unbelievable. And then I moved to, and that building was sold to an REIT, and they immediately wanted $1 a foot, and I said, I can afford this. So then I moved to the valley, San Fernando Valley. I'm in an all-Hispanic neighborhood in an old department store, and I have 15,000 feet there too, no windows.
No windows.
So you come in now, and
you have to work.
And now you have to keep your head down a little bit.
And people have to look at the books instead of looking out the window.
Right.
Well, we don't have a lot of time left, but I do want to ask, and I'm hoping I'll get the answer I'm hoping for, is you've been in the trade now in one form or another for about 25 years.
Yeah.
Do you have any plans to retire?
No, I think that as long as my health holds on, I love being with books. Books is a passion of mine. I, like some other people, I don't really know how the future will play itself out, and I don't know that I may not need to somehow reinvent what it is that I do to keep pace with the changes that are going on around us.
Well, that means you will be a survivor in the book trade if you're willing to change.
Yeah,
So,
I think we all have to, unfortunately.
I expect to see you around for many years to come.
Taylor, I hope you stay alive and well for a long time too, sir.
Thank
They say
you.
in Hebrew, I may have esrim until 120. I like to amend that to say with good health and clarity of mind.
I think that's a good amendment to have. Eric, thank you very much for speaking with us today.
My pleasure, Taylor.